The weight of his suitcase felt lighter than it ever had. It wasn't the clothes or the belongings inside, but the freedom it represented. With each step, the pavement beneath his feet seemed to ease the burden he had carried for years. David stood at the threshold of everything he knew. His job, his family, his life, and yet, he could not shake the question that haunted him as he walked away. What had pushed him to this point? It had been a week since he packed his bags, the day he finally stepped out of his office for the last time. That morning, he had walked into the familiar building one last time, greeted by indifferent faces and hushed whispers. The decision had already been made. The resignation letter was on his desk, and his mind had been made up. But what was the last straw? What had finally driven him to leave behind everything he thought he knew? David couldn't pinpoint the exact moment when his life had spiraled into this suffocating cycle. But if he closed his eyes, he could feel the weight of every regret, every missed opportunity, every second wasted in a life he no longer recognized. He had always been the reliable one, the one who played by the rules, who sacrificed everything for the dream of stability. The dream that had promised a happy marriage, a successful career, and a life free from chaos. But instead, his marriage had dissolved. His career had become an endless grind of monotony, and his relationships had withered in the shadows of his unrelenting work ethic. The last few months had felt like a series of missteps, each more painful than the last. His wife, Sarah, had left him a year ago. She had begged him to come back, to make time for her. But David was too caught up in his own world, in the illusion that work was the only thing that defined him. He remembered the way she had cried that night, begging him to choose her over the job that had consumed them both. But he hadn't, not then, and now there was nothing left to save. The career he had worked so hard to build had crumbled in a similar fashion. A high-paying job that once gave him a sense of purpose now felt like a gilded cage. The promises of promotions, recognition, and success no longer held the same weight. He felt like a cog in an endless machine, moving through the motions with no real sense of fulfillment. His body had begun to show the signs. Constant headaches, sleepless nights, anxiety that seemed to consume him. The job that had once defined him had begun to break him. But it wasn't just the job. It wasn't just the failed marriage. It was everything. His relationships with his friends had withered. He had spent so much time focused on external achievements that he had forgotten what it meant to be present, to be human. He had failed to recognize the simple joys of life, the warmth of a shared conversation, the laughter of a friend, the peace that came from being with loved ones. And now, here he was walking away from it all. The weight of his decision wasn't light. It was heavy, crushing even. But it was also the only decision that felt right. David's feet carried him through the streets, past the coffee shop he used to visit every morning, past the park where he used to walk his dog before it ran away. The familiar sights only made him feel more lost. But then, something shifted. He passed by a small bookstore he had often walked by without ever going inside. The wooden door creaked as he opened it, and the warmth of the shop greeted him like a forgotten embrace. He stepped inside, his eyes scanning the shelves, his mind racing. "Can I help you find something?" the old woman behind the counter asked. David hesitated. "I don't know. I guess I'm looking for something different." The woman smiled softly. "A lot of people come in here for that very reason." He browsed the shelves aimlessly, pulling a book off the shelf without really looking at it. As he flipped through the pages, he found himself lost in the words, a quiet voice calling out to him in the form of a passage that resonated deep within his soul. He read the words again, his breath catching in his throat. It was as though the universe had written those words just for him, like a message from the past calling him to make the change he had been so afraid of. His heart raced. He had spent years waiting for the right moment, for the perfect conditions, for life to hand him a neatly packaged solution. But the truth was, the moment was now. He had the power to decide, to choose differently, to change his life in one single courageous act. David closed the book and bought it without hesitation. For the first time in a long time, he felt a spark of hope. It wasn't the kind of hope that promised everything would be easy. No, it was a raw, unrefined hope. Hope that came from accepting that life was messy, that change was hard, but it was also possible. He sat on the steps outside the bookstore, the weight of his decision finally sinking in. He didn't have all the answers. He didn't know what the future held. But for the first time in years, he felt a sense of peace. He knew that he had made the right choice. The hardest part wasn't walking away. It was choosing to walk towards something new. David's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a message from his former colleague, Sam. "I heard about your resignation. You sure about this? You could have had it all." David stared at the screen for a moment. For so long, he had defined his life by what others thought he could have. The success, the recognition, the admiration. But none of it had brought him the peace he craved. He typed a single reply, "I'm sure." With that, he turned off his phone and tucked it away. He stood up, feeling the weight of his decision but also the lightness of possibility. He didn't know where his journey would take him, but he knew it was his to define. He was one decision away from a new life, and he had finally made it.